Pozdravljeni, Sem Marja Milič in gledate Moneyhow, prvi podcast o upravljanju denarja pri nas. Preden gremo na današnjo epizodo, bi vas rada spomnila na naš dogodek, ki se bo odvil 20. aprila v Kristalni palači, torej v živo, Moneyhow Live. Z nami bodo kar zanimivi gosti, ukvarjali se bom kar precej za umetno inteligenco in za investiranjem, tako da z nami bodo Damjan Merlak, Andraž Graha, ki sta v bistvu redna gosta Moneyhow. Pridružil se bo tudi Tim Umberger, njega ste imeli priložnost spoznati. Mislim, da nekaj mesecev pred izbruhom vojne v Ukrajini je odličen poznavalec kapitalskih trgov, še zlasti trgov v razvoju in pa je tudi nekdanji partner pri ESG C. Z nami bo tudi Luka Podlogar, novopečeni predsednik uprave NLB Sledi, prej je bil predsednik uprave General Investments, sicer pa zelo izkušen investicijski bankir, delo je tudi pri City Groupu v Londonu. Najc Bizjak iz Bitstampa, potem bodo z nami tudi seveda Tomaž Štolfa, večino življenja je preživel med Silicijevo dolino in Berlinom, bil je angelski investitor in zbral je tudi več kot 100 milijonov evrov, Boris Cergol, tudi poznavalec umetne inteligence in regijski vodja podatkovne discipline v podjetju Endava, z nami bo tudi Marko Taler, strokovnjak za robotiko in umetno inteligenco ter razvijalec robotskega delavca. In pa seveda gostili bomo tudi Andraža Brilija, poznavalca dogajanja na trgu nepremičnin. Tam se razmere kar precej umirjajo, tako da bomo tudi preverili dogajanje na trgu nepremičnin. Ja, zdaj pa hitimo na današnjo epizodo. In sicer danes je z nami oče investiranja na trge v razvoju, vsaj takšen vzdevek se ga je prijel. Gre za legendarnega investitorja Marka Mobiusa. Mark Mobius je star 86 let in pravi, da v njegovem besednjaku ni besede upokojitev. Mobius je aktivni investitor, torej zasleduje bolj aktivno strategijo investiranja, nekako zaslovel je kot direktor upravljanja naložb pri družbi Templeton in sicer se je skoncentriral oziroma osredotočil predvsem na Emerging Markets, torej na trge v razvoju. Na Templetonu pa je bil zaposlen več kot 30 let. V tem času je postal kar precej znan po svoji predanosti in pa seveda po znanju o vlaganju na trge v razvoju. Mark Mobius pravi, da je recept za uspeh razumevanje in poznavanje delovanja vodstva podjetja. Pravzaprav je Mobius znan tudi po tem, da je precej obiskoval oziroma je obiskal skoraj do vsako podjetje, v katerega je vložil. Znan je tudi po tem, da zelo veliko potuje. Je tudi avtor številnih uspešnic, v epizodi omenja in tudi seveda priporoča svojo knjigo The Inflation Myth and the Wonderful World of Deflation. Sicer pa je ena njegovih bolj znanih knjig tudi The Investor's Guide to Emerging Markets in Passports to Profit oziroma Passport to Profits. Mobius je redni gost številnih medijev, kot sta CNBC in pa Bloomberg. Pri reviji Time je bil tudi izbran za enega najvplivnejših ljudi na svetu. Mark Mobius je leta 2018 ustanovil tudi družbo Mobius Capital Partners, ki se osredotoča predvsem na naložbe v družbeno odgovorne in okoljske projekte v državah v razvoju. Uživajte v poslušanju. Hi Mark, how are you? I'm excited to have you on our show. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Just for warming up before we dig into specific questions about investing, I know you travel a lot. When was the last time you visited Ljubljana?
Oh boy, it's been at least 4 years. I'd say 2 years before COVID, so it's been quite a long time.
What about Croatia, Zagreb, maybe Belgrade?
Again, no, it's been quite a number of years.
Do you follow Slovenian or Croatian stock markets? They're one of the best performing in the world this year among Laos, Lebanon, Egypt, and Argentina. You're an expert on emerging markets, I know that, but do you also follow frontier markets?
Of course, we do. We follow frontier markets, but the problem with frontier markets, of course, is the turnover, the liquidity is something we need because we're running open-ended funds. So when people want their money back, we have to be able to sell.
Are you maybe invested in Slovenian or Croatian stock market?
No, not yet, but I'll appreciate any ideas you have. We'd love to look at them.
Yeah, the high dividend yield is also one of the reasons for investing in Slovenian stocks. Do you also invest in high dividend yield stocks?
Yes, we do invest in high dividend yield stocks, but mainly we invest in companies that have very low debt or no debt, and companies that have a high return on capital, good cash flow.
Great. Governments in Europe are trying to engage retail investors into buying government bonds. We saw long queues in front of national banks in Spain, Belgium. Also, Croatia was very successful in activating retail investors into buying Croatian bonds. Slovenian government is also thinking about doing the same. What is your opinion about that?
Well, the bond market, you have to be very cautious about it in times of rising interest rates. Because as you know, if you've been reading about the failure of a bank in California, the reason is that they had bonds, long-term bonds, which lose their value if interest rates go up. So, for example, if they had a 5-year bond paying, let's say, 3%, and interest rates for the same bond today go to 5%, their 3% bond loses value. And that's the reason why many of these banks are in trouble, because they're sitting on these long-term bonds and their balance sheets begin to look very bad. If they are forced to sell, they have to sell at a loss, which is why the government stepped in and said, look, we'll buy back at face value rather than at the discounted value.
Just one more question about bonds. The Slovenian government is also thinking about issuing bonds in China and Japan just to diversify. Other European countries are also doing the same. What are the risks for countries that decide to do so, especially in China?
Well, in the case of China, as you know, China has been very eager to spread influence into other parts of the world. And so they're willing to buy bonds denominated in renminbi, their own currency. I'm not sure what the government is planning to do, what kind of currency they want to plan to issue in, but the Chinese prefer to have renminbi bonds so that they can easily print money and pay back.
Do you think is that good idea for country to do so?
Yeah, I mean, if the yield is good and if the currency is stable, then it's a good idea. But, you're dealing with two things. One, you're dealing with interest rates, and two, you're dealing with currency. So, as you know, many of these currencies have been devaluing against the dollar or against the euro, which is sort of the benchmark. So that's a problem. But if you can use the currency and there's no devaluation, then it's fine.
Now that you are talking about currency, the tension between East and West are in full swing. Some experts say there will be or there is already a currency war going on, dollar versus yuan, and that we will all, either investor or countries, eventually be forced to pick a side. Can emerging markets form an alliance and unite against developed countries? And do you see maybe China becoming the leader of major emerging economies?
There have been a lot of moves, as you know, of countries getting together to create a common currency. But to do that creates lots of problems because you then have to decide who is going to be the agency issuing this money and what will be the backing of the money. In other words, what will be the source of strength of the currency. Mm-hmm. And in the case of China, yes, they want to become a reserve currency, but the problem there is that they control the currency very tightly. They're very careful about how the currency moves. So this presents a problem because if you have a government that's controlling the currency to such an extent, it can go against you if they decide not to support the currency. So there are some problems. One of the reasons why the US dollar is so popular is because it's freely traded. The exchange rate will vary freely, and that is a source of strength in some ways. But of course, that means that you have lots of volatility as well.
As an experienced investor, how do you manage the currency risk when investing in emerging markets?
We look at that very carefully. And what we do is we look at the foreign reserves of a country in which we're invested. So let's say if we're going to Croatia and we're buying it in Croatian currency, I want to know what are the foreign reserves in Croatia and what are the restrictions on the exit of money from the country of foreign exchange. Because at the end of the day, we put money in, we want to be able to get it out in dollars. So that's the thing we look at very, very carefully.
So one of the most important things when we are talking about investing is the diversification. Are you fully invested in emerging market, or is your portfolio globally diversified?
It's really emerging markets, but globally diversified. So we're invested in Taiwan, China. We're invested in Vietnam, in Turkey. We're in India in a big way, in South Africa, in Brazil. So we're pretty well diversified.
As I mentioned before we started recording, Money How is about financial education. The question I often get from younger listeners is whether I remember the first stock I bought. You have been on the stock market for several decades now. Do you remember the first stock you bought? How old were you? Who motivated you to invest? And which stock did you buy? Do you remember?
I bought a stock when I was earning my PhD at MIT, at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I was doing a thesis on communication satellites. And at that time, the ComSat Corporation was being formed by the U.S. government, and it was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So I bought stocks in that company and made some money. So that was the first time I was able to get a success.
I also asked Jim Rogers the same question, and he couldn't remember the stock. As I mentioned before, you're a very experienced investor, and you probably seen it all. You chased bulls, bears, and witnessed many stock crashes and crises. What period in time throughout your engagement with the capital market would have the most resemblance to today?
There in every bull and bear process, the trends are the same. They look very, very similar. You get a panic and people sell. The market falls very rapidly, and then there's a slow recovery. So the bear market usually is short in duration, but it's very severe. The bull market lasts longer. And so that's the reason why it's a good idea to be investing after everyone has sort of lost hope. When people are not willing to go into the market, then that's a time for you to go in. So I remember John Templeton, my mentor, used to say, to buy when others are despondently selling and to sell when others are greedily buying requires the greatest fortitude but pays the highest rewards.
Something similar Warren Buffett also said.
Yeah, that's right. I think he believes the same way.
Yeah. So are you more bearish or bullish currently?
I'm always bullish. I always looking at the bright side. And of course, when things are looking bad, that's the time when you really want to be investing because the market usually is weak and there are bargains to be had. So it's not a good idea to be pessimistic because if you look at the long-term trends, the stock markets tend to rise and rise simply because the companies are adjusting to inflation.
Mm-hmm. So are you more fan of active or more passive investment strategy?
Active. The idea is to get to know companies, get to know the managements, and invest according to the information you get, the detailed information you get.
Is active strategy more suitable for more experienced investors?
You can be a new investor, but if you do your homework, in other words, if you do your research, there's no reason why you can't be as successful as someone who's had long experience. But it's a good idea to emphasize the research side. In other words, make sure you try to understand the company, the management, and of course, the financials.
Throughout the years, you also have caught quite a few nicknames, like the father of emerging markets or the dean of emerging markets. Times when you made the decision to invest in these markets were totally different. Can you share some lessons you learned from past investments in emerging markets that have influenced your current investment approach?
Well, I think the key lesson I learned was that after every bear market, there's a bull market. That's a very, very important thing. And the bear markets are very short in duration. So that's the number one lesson. The second lesson is that the financials are important, but probably more important are the people behind the company. In other words, who owns the company, who is running the company, what is their philosophy? What is their personality? What is their reputation? So these are the things I've learned over the years. You just can't look at the financials or the stock price. You've got to look at the people behind the company.
But you have to have access to these people, or you can just watch them on the news or read their opinion about certain things. Yeah,
you can use all sources. Nowadays, it's amazing kind of information you can get. When I was starting out, the internet was not as widely spread. There was no YouTube. There was no information about individuals that you could get on the internet. And now you can get tremendous amount of information. But of course, face-to-face communication is important. And it's not only the company itself, but the competitors to the company. What do they say about the company? What do their clients say about the company? What do their suppliers say about the company? All this information is important.
So you read a lot.
Yes, read a lot and travel a lot.
Travel and read a lot. You are one of the pioneers of investing in emerging markets. Emerging markets have always been considered politically unstable. How do you evaluate political and economic risks in emerging markets in the long term, and also the potential impact on investments?
Well, if you look at the political environment in every country, it's unstable, it's unpredictable. Look at the US now. Look at the European countries. There's always instability in one direction or another. So emerging markets are not alone in this respect. But the important thing is to look beyond the political instability and look at the results of any political instability. And the two most important things is, first, is the government going to take over private enterprise? So if you're investing and the government comes in and says, look, we are going to turn this into a state enterprise, then you better get out. Don't be involved in that situation. And the second and most important political event is when a government says we are going to restrict the outflow of foreign exchange, because then you won't be able to get your money out. Other than that, you can pretty much invest in any kind of political environment. But as long as those two conditions are there, that is really what you should be looking at.
That actually happened in the last years in Europe, in energy sector, and also in China. We could see all sorts of activities there.
Yes, exactly. So you've got to be very cautious about those factors.
And when we talk about China, how do you approach investing in China? What instruments do you buy there? How do you collect data about the companies?
Well, we do it the same way as we do in any other country. The Chinese companies are very open to talk about their operations. We invest a lot through the Hong Kong market because it's much easier to get in that way. But otherwise, Hong Kong and China are no different from other countries around the world. We're able to do our research and get information and interview the managements interview their competitors and so forth. So it's not really a problem.
And what sectors are the most problematic in China currently?
I would say currently the technology sector is most interesting because, as you know, the government is promoting technology in a big way. That would be important. And then the consumer sector, because it's a huge consumer market. It's over 1 billion people, so there's a great opportunity to sell consumer goods.
The interesting thing was developments around Alibaba and its founder, Jack Ma. What is your opinion on Jack Ma being basically directed to essentially stepping away from the company and dissecting Alibaba into smaller companies?
Well, I think Jack Ma made the mistake of criticizing the government. As you know, the government in China does not like to be criticized, and that was his big mistake. He should have stayed involved in his business rather than in politics. The breakup of Alibaba could be a good thing because you've got parts of the organization that are very valuable. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
Mm-hmm. A new study shows that People's Bank of China has deployed at least $240 billion since 2000 into 22 countries, including Argentina, Pakistan, Nigeria, at the time of growing rivalry between US and China. What's your opinion about that?
Well, I think the so-called Belt and Road project, which the Bank of China has been financing around the world, has been generally a good thing because they have been building infrastructure in these countries. I know recently I visited Sri Lanka, and the Chinese built 2 beautiful ports, a big container port in Colombo and another port in the south of the country. So a lot of this infrastructure in Africa in particular has been beneficial to these countries. Of course, the debts may be difficult to pay off in the short run, but in the long run, I think this will come good. So I think the competition between China and other countries is probably a good thing because they'll all be putting money into infrastructure.
Does this mean that China is slowly conquering the world by doing?
Well, they're becoming much more important than they were before, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to emerging markets, environmental, social, and government considerations are not exactly on the top of the agenda. How do you incorporate ESG into your investment decisions in emerging markets?
We incorporate ESG in our research. And by the way, we've added a C, culture. So it's ESG plus C. And the reason why we pay attention to these factors is that it's a way to control risk. So if a company is doing bad things to the environment, that's a risk to the company because they can be prosecuted or criticized. If the social infrastructure in the society is such that they don't like a company, that's not a good thing for the company. And if the corporate governance is no good, then shareholders will be cheated and will be perhaps disrespected, which is not good. And most important of all, the culture within the company, the morale of the staff is critical to reduce risk. So all of these factors, we believe, are a way to reduce risk and help us to make better investments.
Mm-hmm. It seems that US is also reading a page or two from the Chinese playbook. What's your opinion about US scrutiny of ByteDance and TikTok?
Well, Biden has instituted a big program. Biden and the Congress has instituted a big program on semiconductors, as you know. They're now embarking on a multi-billion-dollar program to build semiconductor plants in America. So that's probably a very important move. And then also, you've seen Biden emphasizing infrastructure in America, which is also very good. So a lot of money is being spent on these programs.
What about, do you think that US will ban TikTok in US?
There's a good chance that TikTok will be either forced to sell to American investors and separate themselves from their Chinese owners, or could be banned. But that's still up in the air.
You think that they can risk resistance among young people if they ban before elections, and could this also affect the course of elections next year?
Probably not. I think there are a lot of alternative routes to communication in America. Not only TikTok, you've got WhatsApp, you've got YouTube, you've got all these other communication devices, and TikTok is just one. But TikTok is very entertaining for young people who are not really involved in politics to that degree.
So the election parade in U.S. actually already started with the arrest of Trump. What are your expectations regarding the elections in the U.S. next year and the consequences for geopolitics?
Well, this trial or this accusation against Trump and his arrest is probably going to help him, because you'll get a lot of people who are sympathetic with him. As you know, the charges against him are very weak and are politically motivated. So this will, I think, elicit a lot of support for Trump.
And the American elections also have an impact on the stock market. How should investors take this into account when investing?
I don't think they can do much about it. Whether it's a Democratic candidate or Republican candidate, it's not going to make that much difference, frankly. So you're better off watching what companies will be impacted by various programs. So, for example, if you're looking at a semiconductor company, they're certainly going to be favorably impacted by the spending of the government. So that's the kind of thing you've got to look at.
And what is your opinion about artificial intelligence and using it as a help in making investment decisions? Do you maybe use ChatGPT?
Well, so far, artificial intelligence has not been fully utilized in investing, but there are some hedge funds who have done very well using a tremendous amount of information and increasing the speed of computers, which can help them to decide what are the trends, what are the movements in the market. You must remember, AI is simply speeding up of calculations. The various formulas used, of course, are not different. They have to be the same, but at the end of the day, the speed at which these formulas and paradigms can be calculated is really critical and very helpful if the computer is a supercomputer and can speed up the calculations.
Do you also invest in artificial intelligence?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Do you maybe know in China what's happening in this sector of artificial intelligence?
Oh, well, of course, the Chinese are working on it. Companies all over the world are working on artificial intelligence. So this is something that's a global phenomenon.
Do you also invest in tech stocks?
Yes.
Maybe you can mention a stock or two. Where did you invest?
Well, we invest a lot in the so-called fabless companies that are doing the software for semiconductors. Those are the companies. And also we invest in software companies.
So what is your view on cryptocurrency?
Well, cryptocurrency is a faith. You've got to believe in it. And there are many believers, that's for sure. So you can see that many people are seeing it as an alternative to the various fiat currencies issued by governments around the world.
So do you also invest in crypto?
No.
What is your take on gold? Did you add gold to your portfolio?
Yes, I believe everyone should have some physical gold. In the event of, let's say, a world war or some very dire situation where things really fall apart, there is going to be use of gold, because at the end of the day, gold can be used as a currency.
But it's not very practical to have physical gold.
That's right. Difficult to carry around.
Carry around, yes.
Gold coins can be very useful.
What is your opinion about target inflation of 2%? Will central banks manage to bring inflation down?
If they continue to raise interest rates and withdraw money from the market, yes, they will be able to do that. But it will create some pain in the meantime.
After the collapse and problems of some banks, as you mentioned in the beginning, in US and also in Europe, will any more skeletons fall out of the closet in the coming months? What do you think?
I doubt, because the central banks around the world have made a notice that they will come to the rescue.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they created this mess. Now they have to clean it up.
Yeah. But do you think this is the right approach to just bail out everyone who's in trouble?
That's the only approach, because at the end of the day, you'll have a political upset, and the central banks are very politically motivated at the end of the day. They're appointed by politicians, and they will try their best to avoid a big fallout, a big problem. But in relationship to interest rates, inflation, and so forth, I recommend everybody to read my book. I know you know about my book, The Inflation Myth and the Wonderful World of Deflation. I hope people will read that, because it gives you some insight into my thinking about inflation and money generally. Great.
Thank you for that advice. I have to apologize for mentioning your age. You're 86 years old and
Yes.
Still very active investor and public speaker. Do you ever think about retirement?
No, I don't know that word.
Yeah, but it's very interesting thing that because the pension reforms are very problematic topic around the world. For example, the pension reform in France, people don't want to work after 60. Can you give them advice how to stay active till 86 years?
Yeah, I don't think people should give up work. They should continue to work, but they should continue to do what they like to do. In other words, they should do work in jobs that they enjoy. If they don't enjoy the work they're doing, then they shouldn't be doing it. They should be finding something else that they enjoy. But I think it is a big mistake for people to want to retire. As you know, most people, once they retire, they die pretty quickly. They don't stay around very long.
Yeah, that's the sad statistic. That's true, yeah. We learn from our mistakes, but it's still useful to hear the mistakes of experienced people. Can you mention one of your biggest mistakes that cost you a lot of money, and what lessons did you learn?
Probably the biggest mistake I made was to not learn more about the ownership of the companies in which we invested. Very often we would talk to the finance manager or to the investor relations people, but we didn't understand the people behind the company, and that's where we made big mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for our listeners and viewers about long-term investments, how to invest for the next 5 years?
Well, the first thing is be globally diversified. In other words, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So if you're living in Croatia, yes, invest in Croatia, but also invest outside, so you have a diversified portfolio, because anything can happen in any country at any time. The second thing is take a view that is longer term. In other words, don't react to the short-term movements in the market, because if you do that, you'll get caught up and you'll probably lose money. The third thing is don't take the advice of other people. Don't take my advice. Don't take your advice. Take your own advice by researching and looking at things very, very carefully yourself and making your decisions.
So education is the key for success.
That's right. And education doesn't mean that you have to go to school and get a bachelor's degree or master's degree or PhD. What you have to do is go out there and learn. There's so much information available now on the internet, in libraries, that people can educate themselves very easily.
You just have to be motivated enough to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your excellent advice. It was an honor to have you as a guest on our show. I wish you all the best and hope that you will sail through the volatile stock market smoothly.